Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Ann Leckie is a science fiction author. This is her debut novel. It came out in roughly 2014. She's since gone on to write other books, and this is a trilogy. There are two other standalone books that are also in this universe, so I will tell you just this is the only book in the trilogy I've read. Um, there's also, she published a few years ago a standalone fantasy novel, and she's also done a lot of short fiction writing. She started writing this, I guess, in 2002, according to Wikipedia. She also won a Hugo for this book. It's her first novel. So she's a very, I think it's pretty safe to say she's a um, science fiction writer of some renown, and she's American. This book, Ancillary Justice, is a little hard to describe without spoiling, so I'll try to do my best. The book is set it's in the far-flung future. There is our main character is a artificial intelligence who, at one point in the novel's told in kind of two different timelines, is the artificial intelligence for a warship, a spaceship. And on one timeline, that is who the character is. In this universe, there are things called ancillaries, whereas, as I understand it, they are artificially intelligence controlling what I think are human bodies. Um, and so, one timeline, she is the artificial intelligence of a warship. On another timeline, by timeline, same timeline, not parallel timelines, same timeline, same universe. They're kind of two timelines in the same universe, same story. She's an ancillary or a character who is a human being, but has the artificial intelligence controlled human being essentially. And she is some on in the main quest, the main thrust of the story is her trying to do something of a revenge story to make up for something that happened in the past. The prior timeline is her being on a warship uh, on this planet where she had ancillaries on the planet, and the universe in this universe is ruled by essentially a single emperor like character who is human, and the human beings are something of colonialized. They have colonized different planets, and they're using these as buffer areas essentially against other alien races. There's not a lot of detail about that in the book, which is kind of one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's kind of the general idea. And the two timelines kind of. The first time I was really explaining the revenge and why this character is out for revenge, and the second timeline is really the revenge itself. And they're kind of interwoven up to a certain point, and then the book kind of takes over with the more recent timeline. So, for lack of a better setup, that's really the setup of the book. You get into the world building, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The thing I like about the book, so it is kind of a fresh take. You don't have a ton of novels about colonialization, and that plays a relatively small part in the book. But some of the details about the human characters as they're interacting with the home planet or the indigenous people on the planet that they're interacting with for a portion of the book is pretty interesting. The Ratchi, I think, are the human characters, and they have certain customs, and they're very much have like a single religious figure, and they basically similar to what Romans did back in ancient Rome, they would incorporate gods of the peoples into their own main religion in a way that I thought was interesting. So some of the detail work there was interesting. The characters gloves play a very significant part in the book as far as if something is considered civilized or uncivilized. I thought all that was interesting. I wish there had been more kind of detail of it. She has this thing where the language of the Ratchi, I believe, everybody is kind of assumed to be female, and so there's a constantly, as the main character, Breck is what she's called, kind of goes back and forth between male and female pronouns, but in the language that she's speaking, the Ratchi language assumes a female pronoun, which I think the actual effect of the book itself was kind of escaped me of what the point of that was, but that was in the book. Um, Let me see if there are any other things that I thought were positives about the book before going into my negatives. I thought the underlying idea itself was kind of a cool idea. I think having a main character who is an artificial intelligence can lead to a lot of cool, interesting things. My problem with the book is it very much struck me as kind of a first novel in the sense that what it reminded me of not so much a novel, but there's a movie called Sorry to Bother You, and the director very clearly put in all these different ideas into the movie, and the movie feels like overwhelmed with all these different things, and so like no single piece of the work really breathes, in my opinion. And that was kind of similar here. You have the thing with the gender, you have the thing with the ancillaries versus humans who are not ancillaries, which was kind of confusing and didn't really understand that. The world building, I thought left a lot to be uh, left a lot to be desired. I wish that she had, similar to John Scalzi's Collapsing Empire, which I'll leave a link below in the notes. I wish she had had something of a cold opening chapter similar to that book that kind of sets the tone of the world, sets the why this world is different, what the stakes in the world are, who the main characters are that are important, or at least kind of an understanding of the geopolitical significance of all this stuff. The way that she handles this, Ann Leckie handles it, is really in drips and drabs throughout the world. And so, pretty late into the book, you're getting new information, and you're like, I don't really know what to do with this. I don't know why you're telling me this. And so, it just felt like kind of just like things that were thrown at you. It was very hard for me to care about the characters. I found not. It was very difficult to do that. I think the colonialization part, that's an interesting part of the book, is a relatively small portion of the book where you're on this planet and you're interacting with these characters who clearly are being what they call annexed, but that process is in of itself very unclear. There's certain terms like re-education that are left very vague on purpose that I think were really frustrating because it's hard to really, for me, the world building was not always clear of what exactly was going on. There's a kind of a main emperor character, and not to give anything away, but um, the whole deal with that character I thought was confusing, and I didn't really understand: is she human or is she not human? Is she artificial intelligence? Is she not artificial intelligence? What exactly is her? How did she rise to power? Like, how did any of this happen? And so all that to me was left like really, really vague, and you're just kind of thrown into this world. And sometimes some authors can pull it off, and some can't. And for me, I felt it was really hard. The pacing of the book I thought was strange. There's a part in the book where Breck is going to somewhere to get something, and she's interacting with a character. We spend a long stretch of time as she interacts with this character and trying to understand. I think Ann Leckie's kind of using this to build kind of character moments between Breck and another character who I think is called Stryden, and or maybe it's Fearden. But and that's another thing. The characters all have similar names, which is also I thought kind of frustrating. And she'll throw in new characters at the end towards the end of the book that weren't in the beginning. And it was just very difficult for me to kind of keep these different characters of who they were in my head at the same time because they're not really nothing really stands out about any of the characters either, and so it was very hard for me to really care about the fate of these characters. There's some in the book, for considering the book is like 400 pages, there's not really a lot of action points in the book until probably the last like 25%. There's a couple action scenes, but there's nothing really to kind of keep you propelled other than kind of this mystery, which there is something of a mystery, though it didn't really make a ton of sense to me of the underlying reason for this quest. As far as the like logistics of it, didn't make a ton of sense. So overall, I thought there were some interesting ideas in the book, but the execution left me really cold. The pacing point, to come back to my original point on that, it felt like we spent a long time in certain parts of the book that were just not particularly interesting, and the parts that could have been interesting we left kind of relatively quickly. And the book is not so chock full of like interesting places and things to kind of distract you from the fact that it's just kind of like 101 stuff. There wasn't anything like really, to me, memorable. Any places that we go into the novel that's particularly memorable, characters that are particularly memorable, the hows and the whys of all this stuff she doesn't really go into. So I think like she could have really used like a Scalzi, you know, George R. R. Martin that he always does with each of the Song on Ice and Fires to really kind of drop you in, explain what you need to know about the world, and kind of set you on the path. Because otherwise, I just kind of like was trying to put together the pieces, and I found myself at like page 200, and I realized that like I didn't really know, there wasn't like a ton that had happened, and I just felt the pace of it really wasn't strong enough. I don't know if the twin timelines helped her. I think in some ways it didn't really help her. I think if she had more world building in the beginning, that would have maybe served the book better. I think the book is probably a little too long, probably 30 or 40 pages too long. There's some clunky writing. There's some places where the show don't tell rule doesn't seem to apply. Um, that's really it. I think if you had told me this novel was like had won an award for first novel, I would have said, okay, this strikes me as a first novel. There's some interesting ideas, and there are new ideas that are fresh, that are different, slightly, kind of, sort of. I'd say okay, but like the fact that it won the Hugo to me is like, I would not particularly call this a Hugo-worthy novel myself. That was kind of one of the things I read, and I was like, okay, well, this is clearly like pretty well renowned. People established was the word I couldn't find earlier. Ann Leckie, I would say now, a solid established writer in this genre. This to me, this book didn't really click for me. I didn't really understand. The pieces really didn't come together. I was thinking about this earlier, and it felt like kind of a buffet of different ideas that don't ever really gel into one thing. And I think that because of that, there are ways that you could have worked around that, and you could have. And I'm trying to be vague on purpose because I don't want to spoil this for anybody who hasn't read it. But I just didn't feel like the moral code of the universe really was ever fully explained to understand why this particular character had this particular mission, and there was no other way for them to succeed in what they were trying to do. Again, trying to be vague on purpose. The whole thing didn't really make sense to me, and I think that was because there were things on the peripheral that weren't particularly well established, and I think in the hands of a more skilled writer, you would have had something like Scalzi's cold open in Collapsing Empire, which to me is probably the best part of that book, where it just gives you, in of itself, in its own really kind of short story that has nothing to do with the rest of the book other than to tell you, the audience, what are the stakes of the world, how is this world unique, what is the tone of the world, what are the things you need to know about this universe. And Scalzi's been writing for years and years and years, and Ann Leckie has not been writing for years and years and years, and so maybe that was the difference. But she had been working on this book for 12 years, according to Wikipedia. So to me, given the givens of all that, I was kind of disappointed by it, to be frank. Who would I recommend this book to? If you are someone who's a Hugo completist, you'll like this. If you're someone who has maybe more of a patience for new, different ideas, like if you like the idea of like an AI and understanding how the different AI systems work in this book, you may enjoy that. Like I said, the colonialization thing is a different thing, and it's a different shade that we've seen in other fictional universes, and so the book doesn't really dive deeply into the political universe. There's a lot of stuff about rank and like how there is, because you're talking about two different timelines in the book, there's certain parts towards the end of the book where it's a question of, how is this a meritocratic society or is it an aristocratic society? But the book doesn't really spend a lot of time on that either. So I think the book wants you to care about this thing, but it doesn't really do anything to make you care about it. And the like factions in the world are not clearly defined enough in different houses for you to care about them. It's not like A Song of Ice and Fire where kind of each house has its own distinctive flavor, because she's not writing a 700-page book with like hundreds of characters. That's not this book. But even in this book, where there are different characters and different ancillaries, I didn't really find myself. It was hard for me to kind of separate them in my mind. The personalities are all kind of just there. Like there wasn't anything like where I could understand this character's motivation in this world. Why do they feel that way? What makes them different or unique? And I didn't really know about that stuff. It just, to me, like writing 101 of just giving me a character that is flawed or interesting or unique for some reason. The AI character Breck loves music, and so that's part of one of the things that character does have going for it that is different than the other artificial intelligence characters, and that's kind of brought up in the book a little bit, but not enough to really carry the book to make you care about it, in my opinion. So I was bummed. I wish it had been a little bit connected with me more. I will say this book, from what I've read, has a ton written on it and a ton of podcasts. So I'm looking forward to hearing why I'm wrong, why I'm an idiot. But it got like a 4.0 on Goodreads, and I've seen other people whose opinions I respect that are pretty close to mine. So I'm looking to hear the variety of opinions about it. So I will say the one thing that's cool sometimes to read books that are like 10 years old or whatever is there's a lot of media now about those as people have come back to them. And so you can kind of hear other people's opinions about the stuff, which is kind of cool. There's a lot of podcasts out there on it. If you've read this and understood the whys and how these things kind of fit together, please feel free to drop a comment below. Wasn't for me, kind of bounced off it. But that is Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie. Next time I'm going to be reading, I believe, Deep Unity by Nick Bostrom. It's a nonfiction book. And until next time, please, if you've enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll leave my link to the review for Collapsing Empire below, and I will also leave my Twitter handle if you want to check me out there. Until next time, bye.